Natalie Lough wants you to vote for her for judge right here in Riverside County. June 7th elections are right around the corner. I'm Tim Thompson, and this is Our Watch.
Fake news.
Host Tim Thompson, I'm glad to have you here with us today because we have an important guest as we look at the elections that are coming up, and you need to know how to vote. One of those people that wants your vote is here with us today, Natalie Lough. Natalie, thank you for being here with us.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you very much, Pastor Thompson.
Yeah, so you're here to talk about your candidacy for judge here in Riverside County. Talk to me a little bit, if you would, about what you're doing currently.
So I'm currently a deputy district attorney. I am what's called a senior deputy district attorney. I've been there 15 years. It was the only job I've had outside of law school. I've worked a whole range of cases from child molestation to domestic violence, rape, murder. And for the last 10 years, I've been in our appellate division focusing on post-conviction work. And I don't know if anybody's aware of Prop 66 that transferred the litigation and death penalty cases specifically to local DA's offices. That's primarily what I do, along with other appeals, et cetera.
So working at the district attorney's office, of course, our audience, they know Mike Hester, and I don't know any of our audience that aren't a fan of his. We really appreciate what he does, and one of the things that we can never forget is he has a whole team of people that work for him to help ensure that we are living in a safe environment. And certainly we have our shares of crime here in Riverside County, but when you look at Riverside County compared to other counties in our state, we were truly blessed to be here in this county, and that's thanks to people like you enforcing the law.
Well, thank you. And I will say, with the contrast you're talking about with Los Angeles, the one thing that we do as an office collectively is enforce the law as it's written. And I know that sounds trite to say, but our voters, for example, in the death penalty, repeatedly uphold the death penalty, but you have counterparts in Los Angeles who simply refuse to impose it categorically, regardless of whether or not a child's been tortured and murdered, regardless of a cop has been murdered in the line of duty. There's no factual analysis, which is the job that's the task that is done for the district attorney. That's their actual job, is to look at each case from a holistic, fact-specific lens and say, is it appropriate in this situation? That's why they're elected. That's what their whole entire purpose is. And you have elected officials refusing to discharge those duties. And to me, it's problematic, and it leads to an increase in crime.
So let me, I agree with you 100%. Let me ask you about you personally. Are you a woman of faith?
Yes, I'm a Christian. I was raised Christian. We didn't really have any specific church. I think my mom tried all of them when we were growing up. But my husband is a Catholic and was raised Catholic, very Catholic, Irish Catholic. And so we attend St. Anthony's Church. In all candor, we are Christmas and Easter Catholics, as they're called, and weddings and funerals. But I will say, as faith is a very personal journey for me, as someone who wasn't really raised in any particular church, it's something that my Christianity had to really become more of a focus of my daily life when I took this job. When you're faced with human tragedy and you're faced with knowing kind of the underbelly of society, I had to have a faith and firm up my faith in Jesus. And even though it's something I always held, and the praying every day really became a part of my life when I had to believe that the justice and the injustices we couldn't solve with our own judicial system would eventually be solved one day, or it was too difficult to do my job, to be honest.
Well, you bring up a point I've never heard somebody in your position bring up. That's very insightful, because a lot of times people, they don't realize, like, they think, wow, this has been an injustice, and that, that'll never get dealt with. And the fact is, it'll all get dealt with.
And that's what I believe.
Yeah.
And I believe, and it's not necessarily thinking something that's unique to Christianity, but I have to believe, and that whatever your faith is, that you have to believe it'll be solved elsewhere. Otherwise, I don't know how to process the human tragedies that you see on a daily basis, particularly in law enforcement. And I'm not even a first responder. I'm lucky enough that, yes, I get to deal with the aftermath, but I joke that we get to dole out punishment. One of my son was born early, just for perspective, and I was in the NICU for a long time with him. And speaking to the pediatric nurses, they talked about how difficult it was to see the abuse, and they talked about seeing the children who they had their arm dislocated, et cetera, and how they were lucky to help the children. I said, yes, but I get to punish the people who do it. So
there's always some part of a job you get to enjoy, right?
Correct. And so what I say that with, yes, I don't necessarily enjoy putting people away, but my faith enables me to do that job, resting that I believe I am making the world a better place than I left it for me and my 2 boys.
Sure.
And hopefully the things I can't understand and can't fix will be fixed one day.
Yeah, I agree with you. Let me ask you about your judicial philosophy. What would you say that is?
I believe that you should be prepared. And as Christy mentioned in her video, on time. You'd be surprised at how many people do not show up on time. And that you have compassion for every person in that room, not just the parties you know, and not just the litigants themselves, but you have to treat them with respect and empathy. Like my counterparts have mentioned, that's everybody's likely worst day of their life, right? I mean, family law, you're dealing with children in a messy divorce or potentially the end of a loving relationship. In criminal law, obviously, it's a human tragedy from all angles, whether it's the victims and the defendants and their families. I mean, all of it is a human tragedy. Everybody deserves compassion in that situation and a fair chance to have their voice heard and be seen where they are. I think a lot of times judges' ego can get in the way, at least in my experience, and I think it's important to realize that a day in court and the concept of due process means that everybody gets a chance to be heard and met where they are on an individual level.
So let me ask you about, I mean, you've been working for the district attorney's office, and we're, again, grateful for the job that all of you do there. How has your job as a lawyer and working in law enforcement, how has that prepared you to be a judge here in Riverside County?
It changes you. The job being in law enforcement absolutely changes you. I touched a little bit on it in my earlier question with regard to my faith, but you can't unsee the things you've seen. You can't unlearn what you know. It's almost as a joke, not to be too callous, but taking the red pill in the Matrix. You can't unknow those things. And so it forever colors your perspective. And it doesn't mean you can't be fair. It's just that you understand by the grace of God how lucky you are that you and your family are not victims of crime. I mean, my perspective is unique to criminal law simply because that's been my only career. But you realize how lucky you are. And so at that point, your discretionary decisions that have now been shifted as a judicial officer from law enforcement would necessarily be colored by that lens. Would they necessarily always be? Of course not. I would be impartial and give everybody the same compassion that goes to the defendants and victims. But it has absolutely changed my perspective. It changed how I parent. So it wouldn't absolutely color and change, or not change, absolutely color how I would rule as a judge.
Yeah.
I can't commit to anything, like I said. I don't want to prejudge anything, but
Right.
it's just how you see the world.
Yeah. You know, you talk about the ego of some judges. Decisions are handed out. You know, they make their decision, and let's face it, we don't all always agree with the decisions that some judges make. Now, have you ever seen a judge make a decision where you're like, yeah, no, I wouldn't have done that. I would have done differently. I would have decided differently on that. Have you come across situations like that? Absolutely.
So for the last 10 years, I've basically watched the judges step in it, and primarily what I see is ego, or they feel like they can legislate from the bench. I think there was one that received national attention where that judge in Orange County refused to impose a life sentence on an 18-year-old who'd raped a 3-year-old because he didn't think it was fair, but that's not what the law says. So absolutely you make a different decision. I would 100% enforce the law as it's written.
So, I mean, I don't even know if you would call that leniency. What you just talked about, it to me is insanity.
It's illegal, correct?
Yeah, so, and boy, we need to protect our little ones, don't we?
Yeah.
But we see that things have become, law has become increasingly lenient towards the people who commit crimes, and in an environment like that, how do you if you when you're elected, how are you going to ensure justice in an environment like that?
And it depends. I think justice is just giving the compassion and having everybody have that fair day in court. And I'm assuming you mean hold people accountable as well. And the changes in the law are unique in that they have divested the discretion from the elected attorneys in certain areas, such as sentencing, right, with gun enhancements in particular, right? Those used to be mandatory that anytime you used a firearm in the commission of a violent crime, you were getting an additional sentence. Now there's a discretionary for each judge to decide. Having that public safety and having seen what I've seen, having that background necessarily will be the lens which I look through every case. Will it necessarily mean that I will rule a certain way? Absolutely not. But it's something, like I said before, you can't unlearn and unsee the value of public safety and how lucky we are if we are not victims.
Yeah. We look at changes in our laws. We look at Prop 47, Prop 57, AB 109. These things, when they passed, I knew what was in them, so I knew it wasn't good. Unfortunately, you look at how these propositions are written, and they're very misleading many times. These were certainly misleading. People thought they were voting for public safety, and it was quite the opposite. And now we're seeing the effect that has on law enforcement. We're seeing the effect it has on our community, and it's frustrating to say the least. What do you think? I mean, you're going to be elected as a judge in our county. What do you think you can do about that from a judicial perspective?
Well, to me, it's one of the biggest problems because a lot of those laws shifted discretionary authority to bench officers, right, which are human and therefore fallible. And while a district attorney isn't infallible, a district attorney is someone elected every 4 years, subject to political process, very public political process. There's a greater level of transparency in an individual elected district attorney's decision making. Judges run for re-election all the time, every 6 years, and nobody hears about it. Nobody does anything about it. So when you have that transparency and that accountability as an elected official, you necessarily are going to hopefully make decisions that are more in line with the people who've elected you. That's why you were elected in the first place. So as a bench officer, I would hope to make decisions that I believed were through the discretionary lens of public safety. I believe that's what would serve the people of Riverside County. And I think that is one way you can counteract the decriminalization of a lot of these theft offenses and narcotics offenses.
Let me ask you. You talk about transparency. Transparency is so important.
Hugely important.
Would you support a system where the judge's sentencing, the sentencing that comes down, these decisions would be reported in a local newspaper, including the name of the judge that passed down that sentence?
Absolutely. I think a transparency is necessary in order to have proper accountability. You can't have one without the other. And if the people don't know what is actually happening, they can't hold the judges accountable through political process, right? I mean, a judge is like every other job where you get a office culture you have, and that's going to vary from probably county to county. There are certain things that you can get away then from the sentencing guidelines. You can say, oh, this is how we do it in this part of the county, et cetera. In order to have accountability and, more importantly, transparency, you have to have that.
Mm-hmm. So we look at our judicial system right now. Many people would say it's broken. We have a broken judicial system. There's no doubt there's change that's needed. What would you say is the biggest change needed in our judicial system as it stands today?
I think you've hit it with transparency for the judicial officers, to be honest, because one of the resounding things I've heard while embarking on this journey and running for office is people say, I'm so glad you're out here. We have never have any clue who's running. And I said, I get it. You get to the mail-in ballot, you don't know who the judges are, and you don't know who's on the school board. I've been in that situation, and you have to make a phone call and hope that your friends see the world the same way you do. But the reality is the judges run for re-election up for every 6 years. And most people don't know, but they run unopposed. And if they're not opposed, they're not even on the ballot. So there's this culture where you're afraid to even challenge an incumbent judge because you know one, you're not going to lose. And I hope that changes. I think that the four of us running together and showing you that you can run for judge and people actually do care and have a vested interest in who we are will change that. And I think that will go a long way in stopping the activism.
You talk about the four of you that are running together. I'm going to ask you about that in a moment because I think it's important for everybody to know your four names and why they should vote for you. But I'm believing you four are going to get elected. And that being said, you're going to have to find balance in your life. One of the things you're going to have to balance out is being an independent judge and also being an elected official. How are you going to bring balance to that?
I think they should be one and the same. Like I kind of touched on in my last topic, I would hope that by any order I make, while I may not agree with it, would be able to at least understand where I'm coming from. I've often said in talking to people, the best judges I've ever appeared in front of were somebody who I didn't necessarily agree with the outcome, but I at least understood how they got there. Their reasoning was sound, and they treated me with respect. And if I can't do either of those things, to me, that is the bare minimum requirements. If I can't do those things, I don't deserve the job. And I think I would hope that I would be reelected, but if I wasn't serving the people any longer because I was unable to do those things, that someone would run against me and I would be unelected.
So currently with your job currently, because you're going to be a judge here soon.
Hopefully.
Yeah. The job you have currently, though, if you would just speak to the difference. We talked about L.A. We look at Riverside County. You've got George Gascon in L.A. as the district attorney there. 1 hour after he's sworn in, giving these directives, fundamentally changing the district attorney's office, fundamentally changing how law enforcement works in that county. And here you are in Riverside County. It's obviously a different story with District Attorney Mike Hestron. He enforces laws as they're written. So speak to us, if you would, from your perspective, because you have a unique perspective that most of us don't understand. Why is it different here in Riverside County? What's going on?
I feel that my elected values my opinion as an individual and as an experienced attorney. And I don't necessarily think that when you issue directives like that, you are showing that you value the experience and kind of perspective of the people that are tasked with carrying out the job that you were elected to do. I mean, the reality is the deputy district attorneys are the ones in court, and we are the ones who are putting people away, for lack of a better phrase. We are the one carrying out the task with which he's charged to do. I'm thinking of the elected in LA. And when you wholesale refuse to enforce certain laws, to me, that's not justice, because it's not looking at each individual case, right? I think one of the things that we do at our office is we look at each individual case, and no one is forced to do anything they're uncomfortable with ethically. No one is targeted in any way, shape, or form. It is seriously every individual case, regardless of race, color, class, creed, who's important. It's just, what does the law say and how does it apply to this situation? That is something that I have done, and my ethics boundaries have always been respected. And I don't think that you can say the same when you have wholesale, this will not happen. For example, I know in LA they refuse to prosecute all trespass because it disproportionately affects the homeless. I'm not saying you can't achieve the objective of assisting the homeless in other ways. Maybe prosecuting them isn't the answer, but that doesn't mean every trespass committed is done by a homeless person. That is something that, as a filing DA or an elected DA, you should look at each individual case and come from a holistic perspective. That's what justice means.
Yeah. Yeah. I look at the dynamic between the district attorney's office and the sheriff's office, and how it can really get the morale of the sheriff's department down, because they're out arresting the bad guys. And then the DA says, well, we're not going to prosecute. And it's like, well, what are we doing here? It really makes them feel like they're worthless. And I don't think that's good for our law enforcement our first responders. I don't think it's good for them. Absolutely not.
I mean, I think it decreases morale. And I've listened to Chad Bianco speak a couple of times, and he said the number one cause of injury right now with his deputies is interactions with the homeless. So if you serve an elected, or you work with an elected DA who refuses to prosecute any crimes committed by the homeless, at that point you're fighting a war with absolutely no support. And I'm not saying that you need to put homeless people in jail. Don't want anyone to misunderstand what I'm saying. But to just categorically refuse to do anything about it, how do then your first responders, who are doing the really tough job of saying, I don't know if I'm going to come home to my family today, but I've made a choice and a sacrifice to go and protect everybody else. How do you get qualified, I don't want to say good people, but how do you get people who have the moral character to go do that job, want to come do it when they don't have the support from their other counterparts in law enforcement?
Right. Yeah, no, the answer is they don't want to.
Don't.
That's the answer. And it creates an environment that anybody with a Judeo-Christian mindset does not want to live in, because something about people with Judeo-Christian values is they value law and order. This is something we value. This is something we want. We see it as a good thing for our community. So we want to see, our law enforcement, first responders, district attorneys, we want to see them encouraged. We want to see them able to do their job, and I think it's super important. You are running as a slate with 3 others, and we've already interviewed 2 of them. We still have one more after you that we're going to interview, but just as we conclude this portion of our interviews, tell me who they are and tell our audience why they should vote for all 4 of you.
So there's Christy Kirk, Jay Keel, and Jason Stone. Christy is running for seat 28. Jay is running for seat 11. Jason's running for seat 26 and I'm running for seat 4. And don't let the seat numbers confuse you. We're all county-wide. It doesn't mean that we're individual to a specific district. It's just simply the judges' names are alphabetized, and the people who have vacated, that's where they sat in the alphabet. So I'm running for someone whose last name started with C. That's why my number is further on. I believe we are your judicial candidate simply because we have that public safety mindset that is not going to be appointed. You've heard my counterparts talk about only certain individuals with certain backgrounds are being appointed. And I'm not saying only DAs need to be appointed, but they're simply not being appointed at all. That public safety mindset, what you walk through as a law enforcement person, even though we're not first responders, as I've said, it changes your perspective. You understand the value of law enforcement, and it necessarily will affect what kind of bench officer you're going to be.
Well, I'm really appreciative that you came out to talk to our audience. I think it's important that they get to know you. You're going to be a judge in their county. They need to know the judges.
Absolutely.
You and I had talked about this before the interview, that people, for some reason, they never know who the judges are, and they never know who the school board members are.
Correct.
And I've made I'm not embarrassed by this at all. I'm making sure everybody knows who these people are, because let's face it, it's going to change the environment in which we live, one way or another, depending on how we vote. And so I'm looking forward to seeing all 4 of you get elected. I think it's going to be a good thing for our county.
Thank you.
And I wish you the best of luck, and thank you for coming on.
Thank you for the opportunity, and sincerely, the pleasure was all mine. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, hey, I'm glad that you guys joined us today, tuned in. And I'll tell you what, it's so important that you are an informed, educated voter. Definitely important that you vote. It's not enough to watch this and go, okay, now I know what's going on. You actually need to put pen to paper and turn that paper in. And so we're glad that you're with us. We're going to continue to interview. We have one more, Jason Stone, that we'll get on the program. But these 4 have been an incredible blessing so far. So stay tuned, subscribe to this channel, and we'll see you next time on Our Watch with Tim Thompson.